Hi all, this is Meyleen Velasquez. I am a licensed clinical social worker and a registered play therapist. Some of you may be familiar with the fact that I am currently a doctoral student enrolled in a social work program, and my area of research is anti-oppressive and anti-racist practices in mental health. A couple of months ago, I shared a video on cultural humility, which you can find above. And I wanted to build up a little bit on that conversation with some of the other things that I have been learning, and to bring in the idea of intersectionality. The concept of intersectionality was developed by Kimberlé Crenshaw in the late 80s, following her work as an attorney, and seeing particularly how for Black women, the intersection of race and gender created significant barriers in access to employment. I will post some of her videos down below in the description so that you can learn more about Kimberlé Crenshaw's work and the development of this theory, which is part of critical race theory. So as we think about intersectionality as mental health professionals, we consider all the different parts of an individual that can present in the counseling room. So we want to keep in mind race and ethnicity, but we want to go beyond a tunnel vision view of understanding culture to really understand the fullness of the individual with relation to gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, faiths that they might be bringing, country of origin, or the country that they were born in, physical abilities, cognitive abilities, adverse childhood experiences, hearing levels, whether they're low hearing or no hearing, language, experiences of immigration, family of origin dynamics, and really anything else that makes up that individual, with specific care to keeping in mind experiences that a person has that then face barriers in society. Keeping in mind that the more kind of compounding of intersectional identities that we carry within us, the more barriers that we're going to meet in society. And so in order to have these conversations with clients and to bring this into the counseling room, right, the work has to start internally. So without us applying a cultural humility lens, it's going to be next to impossible to create a safe space and to be really mindful and aware of the power dynamics that are present in the counseling room. Understanding that one, as aware as I may think I am, I'm never as aware as I think I am, right? There's like this constant sense that we have to like overestimate how much we know in terms of understanding diversity. Right? And I think especially when we're not members of a group, right? We hold a sense of sensitivity for understanding the experience of the other. And sometimes within that sense of sensitivity, we might end up overstepping, which, comes from overestimating how aware I am. Perhaps a good check-in with ourselves here might be when somebody poses a question related to something that may be outside of my culture. Whatever that experience, right, of culture is, am I one of the first individuals to jump in and answer? That's that critical self-reflection. If I am, I need to assess, where is that coming from? What might be contributing to my sense of feeling like I need to be one of the first people to answer this question, even though it doesn't relate to a group that I identify with, or as part of, rather? And how do I check myself so that I can take a step back, right, and listen? Because we're not going to be able to do this, anti-oppressive and anti-racist work without being able to sit back, sitting in our hands, closing our mouths, and listening to what people from different marginalized groups experience. Our capacity to sit back, to reflect, and to be aware of the different intersecting factors that an individual may show up with is going to really help our clinical growth, but it's going to help the clinical relationship. So as you look at your practice or as you look at your organization, and maybe you're in a place where you have started to, or you're already implementing new guidelines, new missions, new objectives for your work, and for bringing in an anti-oppressive and anti-racist lens, keep intersectionality in mind. But keep it in mind from a sense or a place of cultural humility. And what that means is constantly self-reflecting, asking yourself, who is in this space, who is in this room, who is not in this space, and who is not represented. And what am I doing? What is my organization doing to add to the reality of a certain group of people not being represented? Being really careful as we think about intersectionality to not lose the sense that in order to do this work, we have to center Black and brown voices. We cannot do this work, right? We cannot move towards equitable ways of working without centering Black and brown voices. And sometimes that gets lost in spaces that begin having conversations about anti-oppressive frameworks, in that different groups of people experience oppression, right? Like the experience of barriers is not, there's not like one group that, doesn't experience any barriers, right? Like we all suffer. But we do have to keep in mind, right, in that idea of like everyone suffers, that there's a system that was set up from its inception to create barriers for Black people and for brown people. So in the same way that we're going to look beyond race and ethnicity, and we're going to think about the things that layer, right, that create more barriers. When we think about intersectional identities, right, so if we're talking about a certain group of identities and the challenges that those identities, experience, right? So sometimes in spaces we may begin having a conversation about microaggressions, and all of a sudden the conversation, right, is taken over by the microaggressions that women experience, right? So we're no longer keeping in mind the experience of Black and brown people, right, which was the initial goal of that conversation. But now, right, like now the conversation is different, which I think it's a very human response to addressing something that's very difficult, because looking at these yucky parts of ourselves doesn't feel good, right? It feels bad. And so we don't do it, which is why I think that cultural humility, even though it's a phenomenal framework, didn't pick up pace in the 90s, right, when Dr. Turbalon and Marie Garcia developed the theory, because it requires personal introspection. It requires me sitting with my implicit biases, right, with my lack of knowledge, with my internalized racism, with my race, right, like with all these parts of myself that don't feel good for me to sit with, but that are crucial to doing this work. And so as you go through your work with your clients this week, I invite you to think about what are the different parts that may be showing up in the room. What are the different parts that are not showing up in the room, right, that they're keeping to themselves, or that maybe they don't feel safe in sharing with us. And perhaps you can ask the client one or two prompts, right? One being, as we think about the different parts of you, what might be important for us to bring here regarding the different parts of you in the world, like your different identities? The other prompt, as a play therapist, I love to do expressive activity, so I might start the same way, right? As we think about the different parts that an individual holds inside of them, I want you to use lines, shapes, and colors to represent on this piece of paper different identities that you carry, different ways that you have of being in the world. Keeping in mind that if we're going to do this work, we have to be really aware of the power dynamics that are present in the counseling room, and that we really have to be practicing from an anti-racist and an anti-oppressive framework. And I think that the only way we do that is by learning, by reflecting, and by engaging in meaningful relationships where we have difficult conversations. So that's a little bit that I wanted to share on intersectionality. I hope that this is useful and helpful to your growth and development as a clinician. If there's anything else that you would like to hear, please let me know. Thank you. Bye.